Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of the second ever EP from the superstar DJ, Steve Aoki. This one is called For Oki. If it's actually pronounced Aoki rather than For Oki, please just don't complain in the comments. This EP in spirit really follows nothing, as all three of his studio albums that he's released, Wonderland, Neon Future 1, Neon Future 2, and then if you want to include Neon Future Odyssey as well, they were all released on Ultra Records. The only full project he's actually released on his own label, Dimmock, is the EP The End of the World as We Know It, which released a little over 2 years ago and is his only other EP release, and being a 2-track EP, it's not much of one at that. Though with the coming of the For Oki EP, I was actually pretty excited to hear this just because I'm a big fan of most of the material that gets put out on Dimmock. So with the label's head finally coming and releasing back on his own label, I was actually pretty stoked to hear the kind of content he was going to put out. And what's the result of the EP? Well, I can tell you for sure it's not cheesy pop electro house like a lot of the stuff that he's been putting out, mainly on his debut album and his following 2 albums. But I honestly don't think the result of this EP is actually much better. The For Oki EP is essentially a bass house EP, and of course the 4 is based on either the fact that it has 4 tracks or the fact that it has 4 collaborators. A few of these artists who make their home on Dimmock, such as Sean Frank and Autoerotic. This EP also features Morten, who's released on Monster Cat, as well as PRMD, which is the same label Avicii releases on. So with a lot of great names on this one, and names that I look up to myself as a producer, I was expecting only the best from Steve Aoki with this EP. Although I'm most definitely not in love with this EP, I do have to give Steve Aoki a hand for producing something a little bit different for once. With a heavy collaborative EP or album, typically people are going to expect there to be a lot of diversity track among track. But with this one, I'm honestly not even hearing much difference from one track into the next. This EP is heavily centered around some very deep vocals, probably rooted in the deep house genre, along with big drops and 4-to-the-floor beats. I really do like the breaks and builds on this, but I do think the drops are honestly a little bit disappointing in nearly every track on this other than the Sean Frank collaboration. I think Dope Girlz is actually pretty huge and probably one of my favorite bass house jams of the last year. Of course, I am a huge Sean Frank fan, and him being a typical future house producer, it's kind of odd to see him shift into this direction. On the other hand, I think Autoerotic and Morten's collaborations on this EP make up for probably some of their worst work that I've heard. On the other hand, let's dive into the track that I haven't talked about yet, which is Bring the Funk Back with the producer Reed Stefan. Now, the issue I have with this song isn't necessarily its sound or anything, and in fact I think it sticks out a lot more than the other tracks on this EP, maybe even Dope Girlz, but I think the problem with this one is the fact that it practically sounds like it's a Jaws and perhaps Milo and Otis or Kilogram collaboration, because most of the sounds that you hear in this thing almost sound directly ripped from their music and even maybe mashed up together. Except the Jaws-esque sounds sound a couple years old at this point, and the Milo and Otis kind of sounds sound a little bit underproduced. Now don't get me wrong, these tracks aren't poorly produced. In fact, I can see almost all of these being huge main stage bangers at big festivals, but that might be precisely the issue, is that Steve Aoki's stretching into genres that are almost less inspired than his pop electro house music, even though I do think these are a little bit better in terms of production. Even though the things I've said today are primarily negative, I actually am heavily looking forward to the future of Steve Aoki's music. We're finally seeing Steve Aoki stepping into some new directions and self-releasing on his own label, which is actually very exciting. I'm hoping this means a permanent departure from ultra music, although one can only hope. I was gonna give this one a solid 4 just for kicks and giggles, but I'm actually feeling a light to decent 3.5 out of 10 on this one, so I'm gonna have to go with that. This one actually wasn't heavily marketed. I had to find it myself, so a lot of you probably haven't even heard about this EP, but if you have, make sure to let me know what your favorite track was in the comments section below. As usual, if you haven't listened to this yet, I have the stream link in the description. Anyway, I'm Steve Aoki, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.